Greetings again, and welcome to the Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa. I'm Nenelwa Tomi, and I'm your host for this show, The Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa. I'm a Tanzanian American, and as I begin every single show, I give a bit of an anecdote about my personal experience, kind of being a first-generation American African. And so today I want to speak a bit about my liberal arts college experience and how that has impacted me, especially as an African immigrant, in the duality that the cultures play in my life. So in the college admissions process, while I was kind of searching for a fit, I ended up applying to a lot of colleges and universities that kind of spoke to me based on their name brand, based on the flashiness of the school, the pizzazz that most of us as students get caught up with in the process. As I mentioned in an earlier podcast, I'm from Western Massachusetts, and so you can't go to another state, even to another city, without being surrounded by really fantastic colleges and universities that are also really prestigious and are pretty well known across the United States. But for me, kind of going through this process again as a first generation American, my parents weren't really sure how to guide me in that sense. And so I did a lot of the process on my own, although I did have a guidance counselor in high school, and we were really, really fond of one another, really close. I don't know if she gave me the best support during that process or mentorship during that process. So I was kind of left to winging it. I applied to a number of those institutions that sounded good, a couple of HBCUs that were also included in there based on my experiences being one of very few brown people in my community, in my high school, and wanting a richer and more diverse cultural experience in college. And then the one great thing my counselor did was give me a book called The Colleges That Change Lives, and it's by Lauren Pope, who was an independent educational consultant who's often had a lot of insight as to what colleges and universities were doing well and what wasn't going so well for those institutions. So he gave really great advice to parents about where to send their kids, because it's often quite a stressful process for parents and their children. And so he gave a lot of great advice. He had a lot of networks and was really in tune with that process. So he started this nonprofit called The Colleges That Change Lives. And there are currently about 44 different colleges and universities that are affiliated. And my alma mater, Goucher College, was one of them. Goucher spoke to me on a lot of different levels. It had a really, really large international focus. And at the time, I wanted to be an international relations, political science major because, one, that's what my dad told me I should do. So I was like, why not? And I also just love the idea of becoming and embodying a global citizen. And so Goucher also was known for its study abroad requirement, and I knew that was something I needed to do in my 4 years in undergrad. So it spoke to me. So the reason I'm speaking about this is because in my work now at my alma mater, Goucher, in the role of admissions counselor and kind of supporter, facilitator of this process, specifically towards international students, I want to support you all in kind of broadening your horizons as you think about where you want to go for your 4-year undergraduate experience. There are hundreds of institutions in the United States that are going to support you in this process and that are wonderful, exciting opportunities. But it's really, really, really important to think about fit, because not all these institutions are going to be the right fit for you, and you shouldn't get caught up in the name brand. You should definitely do your research and think about what your needs are in that experience and how that institution can help you attain whatever goals and ideas you have for yourself. So definitely think about that in the process and utilize your resources. As an admissions counselor, that's what we're there for, is to really guide you through the process, and we aren't utilized enough. But please utilize us, ask questions. At least in my position at Goucher, it's not just about advertising our institution, but it's about helping you find the right fit, even if it isn't our school. So please utilize us in the process. Please ask questions. This is, we know, somewhat of a stressful process, especially if you're coming from abroad, and we want you to have all of the information that you need to make an informed decision. So that is my spiel. So if you've been listening to this podcast, you'll know that the Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa is a weekly podcast that discusses the African immigrants' experience in the United States. We'll be hearing great stories from immigrants of different nationalities, genders, marital statuses, professions, and experiences. Stories of strength, stories that inspire, stories that show us what obstacles to avoid and how our guests have avoided or overcome them. These are ordinary men and women with extraordinary stories. Let's begin. Our guest on the show today is Msafiri Makembe. He's another Tanzanian American and has lived in the U.S. for 37 years. Msafiri is currently working as a volunteer for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Like many African immigrants, Msafiri came to the U.S. to find greener pastures, but discovered that the road wasn't always as easy as advertised. Msafiri, welcome to the Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
We're so happy to have you this evening.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. I loved your introduction. I think that, you have given us really a very, very good way to start getting your education here in the United States. I wish I had a counselor like you when I was applying to college.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're going to begin the podcast today speaking a bit or learning a bit more about your home and where you come from. So can you kind of tell us where home is for you?
Home to me is Tanzania. I was born in Moshi at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro, and Moshi is a town just north of Dar es Salaam, about a 5-hour drive from there. And don't remember much of it because I came to the United States at such a young age. But my grandparents, cousins, my father's side of the family, mom's side of the family are all in Moshi. Now my grandparents live in Dar es Salaam, which is a coastal city in Tanzania.
Excellent. So you mentioned that you came to the U.S. quite young. So can you talk a bit about that transition? You might not remember it completely, but why did your parents decide to come to the United States?
Very, very good question. My father had a scholarship to attend Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And my mother was the supportive wife. So essentially, it was really it was a situation that couldn't go wrong if you think about it. And this wasn't anything small. The entire community came together when they got married and literally groomed them to go over to the United States to find those greener pastures, as you say.
Wow. So they came to the U.S. and your father attended Vanderbilt. So you were living in Tennessee, I presume, at the time.
I was living in Tennessee and very, very young. My father was working hard on his master's, and my mother was a supportive wife. She was a program assistant at the Vanderbilt School of Law. And we were, as a young person, I don't remember, as a 2-year-old, I don't remember that much, but I have seen pictures of myself at that age. And I've had, I had the cowboy hat on and the cowboy boots and just posing for different preschool pictures and that sort of thing. But I found out, I ended up learning later, hey, we are really trying to, we are really working hard to survive here. So what I basically would, like to express is that I don't think they had the time or the comfortability to really assess what would be right for them at the time. This was kind of like I wouldn't want to say life or death situation, but there was a sense of urgency there.
Sink or swim.
Yes.
Completely. Wow. So, Msafiri, do you have any siblings, or were you kind of solo in this experience in terms of that transition, even if you couldn't completely process what that was, that you were in two different places or transitioning to a new place?
That's a great question as well. I was, my sister was born 5 years after I was born.
Wow.
And this was after my father got his master's. We transitioned to UNC so that he could pursue his PhD.
Wow.
And she was born in Chapel Hill.
Wow.
So she's a Tar Heel. Well, she wouldn't want me to say that now, but she's a Tar Heel, yeah. She was born in Chapel Hill in UNC Hospital. And we grew up together sort of as literally a teammate. We were bonded right from scratch, you know. And what happened is that between my mother and father, things didn't work out. And this is probably the advice I'd like to share with most immigrants that are here in the United States, is that for us, we had no guidance, no one to really tell us, you know, what is the right decision to make, what is the wrong decision to make. And with, you know, when there was a division between my mother and father, we didn't really have the avenues of knowing which way to turn. Resources as far as attorneys, counselors, you know, things of that nature. And what was really dangerous was that social services could have stepped in and really separated the family even more.
Even more, right.
So we basically, you know, did what was best. My mother and father separated, and it wasn't really as smooth as I'm explaining to you on this podcast. It was really traumatic. My mother had to literally pick us up with her bare hands. And my sister and I, as we were young, she was holding me by the hand and holding my sister, and we fled the situation unfortunately, because of violence in the household. Now, this is where a cultural difference will come into play. What is acceptable in Africa? What is acceptable here in the United States? And to think what is at stake here. So you have a debate, and I think that my journey explains that a little bit more as we continue and go forward with the interview.
Yes. Thank you for sharing such an intimate story, but such an important one. I don't want to delve too deep because I know we have a lot to talk about, and I also want to respect your space, but can you talk about just being in that situation and how one advocates for themselves? Because I think that can be really difficult when you are in this cultural limbo land, I guess you can say. You know, you still have a lot of the essence and the core of where you came from as your roots and as your foundation, but then you've transitioned into a new space where you might not even have as much control because you don't know the place. It's not as familiar. You don't have just the relatives down the road. It's a very different place to navigate. And so if you're in a situation where you're feeling helpless or not like you're in full control in that sense, how do you advocate without those resources that could have been accessible potentially in your home space?
Well, Nenelwa, that is a fantastic question again. There was no control. Everything was traumatic. And when my mother and myself and my sister separated from my father, we moved in with my mom's side of the family that was in a completely different state.
Wow.
So there was no stability per se, just just hope. And when we transitioned and lived with them, we kind of felt in our hearts that we were leaving a bad situation and entering into a better situation. And I think that's the challenge of trauma and what trauma can do to a family. Now, did we have the wisdom to stop and say we need counseling or we need to go and address some of these serious issues that are happening in the family? No, we did not have that education or that experience to do that. And it's interesting how it even though you may feel that you are lost, we still felt special. And that was the upbringing. That's the Africa in your blood that tells you, I am somebody. My mother at the end of the day carried herself as a Kida, which is her last name, which is the, and this is the essence of what carries her forward. In the mix of all this, we are also integrating into the African American experience. And because of that, now there's a lot of dynamics. There's, you've got self-esteem issues, because I was called everything, African booty scratcher, big, you have a big booty, what's up with that, and you have a funny shaped head, you don't look like us.
And this was across peer groups. So
this was across peer groups.
Students of color as well as non-students of color.
Yes.
It's a common experience.
Yes, absolutely.
And I just find it interesting that you share this because you came to the U.S. so young. So in that sense, to me, you're very American in terms of upbringing, although your home base or your community was very Tanzanian. So it's like that duality. But it's interesting that is something that was pinpointed by your peers and kind of extrapolated as something to harp on. Like, this person is different. It's just interesting because you grew up here. I think it's common for immigrants who are coming straight from a particular country and are coming here in their teenage years or in their adulthood. But for someone who's coming so young, I think that's interesting that was still something you had to face and it was a barrier.
Thank you. Yes, it sure was. What my mind told me and what my parents instilled in me was to put that energy into academics. So for me, academics, it wasn't something that was considered, it was something to come out of poverty. A tool I could use to come out of an impoverished state, or in my case, personally, a traumatic state. I felt that my education was my ticket to self-worthiness. And that is dangerous. So it's a dangerous line to cross because we want to empower immigrants today to take their time and find out what they're interested in doing, versus looking at situations and saying, this is going to be my ticket out of whatever situation that I'm in, or if I'm in a traumatic situation, how do I get out of it? No, we don't want to advise you to do those sorts of things because the end is not too happy. So I'll continue with my story. Academics were my outlet. I felt I was doing well in academics, and when I got praise and acknowledgement, it worked out for me. It worked to my benefit because I had a routine going. I would go to school in elementary and middle school, come home, do my homework. After the homework, you have this opportunity to play outside. And this is the part of the American experience that I love. When you played outside, there were no barriers to your friends and things like that. This is how everyone interacted. We all got together, had a good time. There was laughter. There was jumping off roofs. There was playing in places you're not supposed to play in. Right. There was times where you were going too far, you had to come back, and what was the best was you knew when to come home, and that's when the lights came on.
Right. That is when they came on.
So just, that is an amazing aspect. I feel that the American experience in that sense, and I think there was safety. There was more safety than there is today. I really feel that young people, immigrants especially, have things like social media and internet, which may isolate you. Mm-hmm. So, I don't want to say that it's a bad thing, but I do want to say that, you've got to be social to a certain extent, and meet people where they are, person to person. So, as I continued on, I went on and kept going to school, and it landed me with this awesome opportunity. So my family and I, we moved around a lot, and at the end of the day, we had to move to DC from North Carolina. That was the biggest transition for me. Mm-hmm. And in Washington, DC, that's when I started high school, and I felt my grades started to slip. And my mother noticed that my grades were slipping, and she suggested that maybe I might consider going to school abroad. Wow. And the type of child I was so for it. I was like, I'm coming into my own, but I'm a little confused on why things aren't stable. And I felt this is another opportunity for me to advance myself and make myself more eligible for college. Right. Because even at high school, this is now stuff you're thinking about.
Right. Setting the foundation. Absolutely.
So, by God's grace, I was able to go to school in the United Kingdom. Wow. And this was probably my most enlightening experience to date, because the 3 years I spent out in the UK, it was a school called Hurtwood House, and it was south of London in a town called Surrey. And I got to mix with people that were from Malaysia, from India, from Nigeria, from England. It was a very mixed international school. Mm-hmm. And I was there, by scholarship, but most of the students I was going to school with were paying right out of pocket. So a very affluent school. So people they weren't nobodies that were going to this school. Mm-hmm. So I always teased a lot of my friends in college, and told them, like, hey, I went to school with the heir to Ferrari, but whoa, well then, but so what have you done for me lately? That sort of thing. It was always our little joke, but yeah, school in England was an interesting transition, because I started to see that I was a global citizen. And America couldn't show me that at the time. Right. Everything was American culture, American bread. You had to aspire to be an athlete. If you were in academics, then there was competition there for you. And but there, I had a chance to now deal with this trauma and really process this trauma that I was going through. And it really that's when I really came into my own, because now I am feeling empowered. I am feeling alive. And I'm getting that sense, that fragrance of life. That life is it really just meant to be hustling and bustling and that sort of thing, or is it really meant to be lived? And that's how I kind of started to develop now as a 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-old. Wow. And so my experience out there was great. I learned about rugby. I learned about football, the real football.
The other kind of football.
That's right, the other kind of football. And, the academics were extremely rigorous. So I had, you took 3 classes. This was A levels. If anybody's ever knows about A levels out there,
it's not a joke.
That this is
life or death.
Life or death situation. Very, very disciplined, tough educational programs. So when I came back to the United States, it was by way of university. And my guidance counselor at the time did suggest, I do remember this in high school in the UK, suggested, well, why don't you apply to English schools? But by that time, and this is how I think just life works in general, if you believe in a higher power or what, I just began, at the end of my tenure in England, I started feeling homesick. I started feeling like, wow, I need to be back home with my mother and my sister.
Centering.
And maybe get recentered. Yeah. Absolutely. But, what it did do was make my decisions a lot easier as far as what I would do for, with my life going forward. I applied to 4 universities: Cornell, Duke, McGill, and the University of Virginia.
Wow.
I got rejected from Cornell out front. McGill waitlisted me, and Duke also rejected me out front. And the University of Virginia was the only school that said, yes, you are accepted. You're going to join us in 1996, class of 2000.
Wow.
Now, what that did to my ego, and as a man speaking,
yes,
this kind of just took my ego and just
cut it in half.
Just propelled it. It just went out, off the charts, right into outer space. I'm telling you, because I felt like, you know what, these other schools, okay, fine, they said no, but I'm ready to go to the University of Virginia. They're the only ones that said yes. And my passion at the time was medicine, so I wanted to be a doctor. I had read about their background in medical school and that sort of thing.
Wow.
So much has happened.
What a trajectory.
Yes. And so I get to the University of Virginia, and, it's the same thing happening all over again. The stability is not there. So what you did was you transitioned from one situation, and now you're in another situation, and all along, psychologically, my father is in the back of my mind. And what my father did is in the back of my mind. It's very intimidating because I don't want to end up like him. I don't want to be that man who did those things. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to mask any pain or any hurt that I am feeling. So I get to the University of Virginia. I start to meet girls. And I start to go to class, of course.
We hope.
we want to be going to class, right?
Right.
But I start to meet people of different cultures. But in UVA was very interesting in that it was like you were going to an HBCU.
Really?
Because while we're at the University of Virginia, which is traditionally not that
at all,
the community around us, the Black community, was so present that you did feel like you were going to an HBCU.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that integrated everything, and that is where I think I started to lose myself. In those 4 years, it was a period of just really being lost, trying to make sense of why I was in the UK, why I was from Tanzania, and this American machine is now being integrated back into my mindset again. The grandioseness of the stadiums. Right? The columns when you see these buildings and that sort of thing.
Supersize everything. Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson's legacy is just in your face. But I persevered. I did not finish going to medical school. I did not have a chance to do that. I was under financial constraints and I was dealing with my citizenship challenges. So financial aid was not an option when I started. But all these challenges, really, what I'm here to say is that they do make up who you are.
Yes.
Just be careful not to be hurt. Don't get hurt. Don't hurt yourself. I think as immigrants, sometimes we can tend to think we are invincible. We don't have that voice behind us telling us, hey, you know what? Just take it easy. Pump
the brakes.
Pump the brakes just a little bit. Have an opportunity to look at all your options. You've got time. And it is not conventional that everyone be married at a certain age, graduate at a certain age, do certain things at a certain age, and that sort of thing.
Wow. What a story. Thank you. So one thing I just want to leave our listeners with, because you've shared a lot of really, really fantastic tidbits of just knowledge. If you could just leave a piece of advice that you wish you had known when you had initially, or your family members had known when you guys had initially emigrated to the United States, what would that piece of advice be?
That piece of advice would be realistic and follow your dreams, but also surround yourself with people that have your best interest. And that's not always something very easy to recognize. If you have people, if there's a voice that is telling you an alternative to what you might be thinking is right, consider it. Don't just think that what I am thinking is the right way. And once you do that, you may open a door that you never thought was there.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And then lastly, we just want to hear more about the work that you're doing. So if there's any personal projects that you're working on or any organizations that you're affiliated with that you want to share as a resource for our listeners, please do so and let our listeners know where they can contact you for more information.
Yes. Nenelwa, thank you very much again for having me on your show. If you would like to contact me, it is my email is YOKOMAKEMBE, all one word, @gmail.com.
Excellent.
And the type of work I do is mental health, rehabilitation, and support. So if you ever are in a challenge or in a crisis and that sort of thing, please get in touch with me. I am here to talk. We are in times today that require that there is that type of care because there are just so many socioeconomic dynamics going on. And the expectations are probably... we need to level those expectations just a little bit so that we can get to the next level and also help the next generation of people.
Right. And then before we end, I just want to ask you to just briefly break down what it means, what mental health even means for some of our listeners, because I think for many of us, it's a concept that hasn't necessarily been delved into before for us, or maybe we know about it, but there's a stigma associated with the fact that it could even be applicable to me or to my sibling or to my cousin. So if you could just break that down for us so that we know what type of resources could be available for someone under X, Y, or Z, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. The National Alliance on Mental Illness is a nonprofit organization, a grassroots organization that provides education, support, and advocacy for individuals suffering from serious mental illness. And mental health, essentially, there is a stigma associated with it, but this is what my organization is trying to eradicate, to have people talk about what's going on. And this could be anything from depression, major depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. And you find this happening in a lot, I think, in immigrant communities, but it's not talked about because of stigma and because of what we're taught at home as far as what it means to have that. You may be cursed, you may have some sort of you may have had a bad history, you've done something bad in a past life. Whatever those myths are, there are support systems that you can find in Maryland, the DC area in general, even in this country. So definitely consider that. And I have a personal experience with mental health challenges because I was so assertive and so aggressive to succeed in this world. I didn't realize that I was losing myself in the process. And trauma came back up for me. So, and I don't wish that on anyone. I encourage you all to find support as soon as you can.
Thank you so much, Msafiri. It's been really, really a pleasure having you on the show. It's been wonderful having another perspective on the Tanzanian American experience. So I really, really appreciate your time, your energy, and your thoughts. They've been really, really fantastic. And I just want to reiterate a couple things that I heard that I want our listeners to write down if they can. So I think it's really important to remember to find your outlet, whatever that is. You spoke a lot about that, especially around academics being that space for you. And so not necessarily limiting yourself by those outlets. So not limiting yourself to your academic strengths or your athletic strengths, but utilizing them as a space to step outside of sometimes the discomfort of those transitions to a new place. Be empowered by the process. It's really, really important to look to mentors, to look to your parents, to look to your siblings as kind of support systems for you as you embark on this journey, and to find other ways to empower yourself outside of people. It's really, really critical in order to continue to propel yourself. And then lastly, the challenges make us who we are. So don't try to avoid them because they come where they may, but really learning from them, growing from them, and using them to further yourself in whatever capacity. We aren't invincible, as was said a couple of times. It's really important and okay to feel, to have feelings, to be emotional, to be distraught. Again, those challenges are what help us move forward. And it's important to be realistic about this process. It's not easy. Again, as I say in previous podcasts, the U.S. is not made of gold. There are trials and tribulations that you're going to face, whether or not those were advertised. So be realistic with yourself. And again, just to reiterate the resource that Msafiri mentioned, his participation in the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's important for us to recognize that these things do exist. It's okay. We overcome them as a community and through various other resources. But let's just debunk those myths that they don't exist and the stigmas that are associated with mental illness and mental health issues. So again, thank you, Msafiri, for your time, your energy, your efforts. It was so wonderful having you here.
Thank you, Nenelwa.
And we wish you the best of luck in your next steps and your continued journey. It has been really great having Msafiri here on the show. If there's a guest you'd like us to interview or any questions you want asked on subsequent shows, or you just want to say hello or leave an encouraging word, please post them on the Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa page on Facebook. That's our show for today. Special thanks to the creator and producer of the show, Adetoye Oremosu. The Immigrant Experience with Nenelwa is a weekly podcast, and I look forward to bringing you a brand new story with an enthralling and exciting guest next week. Until then, keep winning.